great deal. Alrighty, through it. This is what they look like. Cheers. Hello and welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather. So we are doing something today that I have dreamt about doing ever since I first started growing ground cherries. So I am not exactly sure of the specific type of ground cherry that I am growing this year. I know there are several different types, but I have enough to actually make something with this year because I planted a ton of plants. I think I wound up with 32 started plants, and about half of those are growing really well inside my greenhouse right now, dropping all kinds of ground cherries all over the place. And we wait until the husks are brown before we harvest them, and inside those brown husks are these lovely little ground cherries that have a really pleasant flavor all on their own. This is one of the reasons why I haven't been able to really collect enough to make something with in years past, because we love eating them fresh. So I've intentionally set these aside and kept them safe from my family so we can make a freezer jam today, a spiced ground cherry freezer jam. I've seen a couple different recipes for making this kind of jam online, and I'll link the recipe that I'm using in the description box below. This one only uses 1.5 pounds of husked berries, which is what I have here. Some other places require about 5 pounds worth, and that's a little bit harder to obtain as a home gardener. This recipe does not use any pectin, although on that website they did share a version with pectin if you'd like to use that. You might have seen my lights kind of dim there. There is a thunderstorm on the horizon, so that may interrupt us, but it'll be fine. So we've added the ground cherries into the pot. Now I need 2.5 cups of sugar. The recipe says to use the juice from 1 lemon and 1 lime. I do not have fresh citrus on hand right now, so I'm just gonna eyeball it. I believe there's about 1/4 cup's worth of citrus juice inside each of those fruits. I would worry more about specifics and measuring that out exactly if I were canning this, but we're not. This is a freezer jam, so you can be a little bit more flexible when you're just freezing it. Now I've got to turn up the heat and bring this to a boil, and then we're going to let this cook down for 40 minutes up to about an hour, and we're going to be relying on consistency to tell us when we're ready to add the spices. This is going to change a great deal over the time that we're going to heat this up. When I was looking up this recipe, I kept Googling for ground cherry preserves, and I learned something. I learned the difference between preserves, jam, and jellies. I kind of knew the difference between a jam and the jelly because oftentimes when I've had jelly, it appears to have been strained, and it's essentially like a thickened juice concentrate. So a preserve keeps most of the fruit kind of whole and as intact as possible. A jam has the whole fruit components within it. It just is broken down and more liquefied. While the jelly does strain out things like seed and most of the pulp and things to get a smoother consistency. The recipe said to use a heavy bottomed pot. I don't know, this is just one of my steel pots. That's what the bottom looks like. I think it's okay. I am gonna stir it pretty regularly so that we reduce the risk of scorching. I am very, very impatient. I'm not well known for my patience at all. And so I've cranked this up to high. You might not wanna do that, but I like to live dangerously. That citrus smells really good. It definitely comes through nicely. I wonder as well if you could do something like this with tomatillos. I am growing tomatillos this year for the first time ever, and I have found that they are essentially just a large ground cherry. They're a little bit more acidic than a ground cherry. These have a lot more of like a smooth flavor to them, more of like a fruity flavor, while those are a little bit more acid. So I think if I did try something like this with the tomatillos, I would probably cut back on some of the citrus juices, but I think it would work just as well, but I don't know. Don't quote me on that. It's just a thought. Alrighty, so we've started our boil here, and it's going to be a little bit hard to see through the foam, but our berries have started to burst. Now this specific recipe doesn't call for it, but I have seen many other recipes call for putting a pat of butter in your jam or jelly to help reduce the foaming. I have not made butter in a little while. I need to make butter. It's on my list, so I don't have any butter. This will be fine. It's something that we can skim off at the end. It's really not a big deal. Just means things are doing, right? At this point too, I am going to reduce the heat. I don't need this at like a full rolling boil for about 30 or 40 minutes. I really would just like this to simmer as it cooks down and thickens, and as these flavors meld together. I wish you guys had smell-o-vision. I say that all the time, but I mean it. This smells amazing. It's gonna be great when we add our spices. I specifically chose this recipe because there was a no pectin option. I am not great at working with pectin in my experience, which is very little experience to be honest. It tends to be pretty touchy. You can underboil pectin and it won't set. You can overboil pectin and it won't set. And I just did not want to mess with it. I have wanted this for so long that I figured we would go the no pectin route. Truthfully, many fruits have their own pectin within them and they just need to be simmered for a little while to release that. Some fruits have more pectin than others. I know apples have a lot of it. I think it's in the skin of the apple. I know that every time I make blueberry jam, I never add pectin and that sets up really well. Whenever I make blackberry jam, I don't add pectin and that sets up really well. So this should do well too. You can see what we've got going down in the pot. When you are making a jam or a jelly and either using pectin or not, there's a really cool trick that you can do to check whether or not your jam or jelly has set. This can be something really tricky when you're getting into making jams and jellies, trying to figure that out. And so what I like to do is when I'm working on the jam, while everything is simmering down, I will put a few spoons in the freezer and these will come in handy in a little bit. Okay, so it's not quite been 40 minutes, but I'm noticing a distinct change in the way that this is bubbling. The bubbles are a lot fatter and it's more of like a crispy, crinkly type of rolling boil rather than something super loose and liquidy, if that makes any sense. Hopefully that makes sense. The way that the bubbles pop has a different sound too. Once you get to making a few jams, you'll be able to recognize this difference, and I think it's just because the liquid is more viscous. So I have my frozen spoon here, and I'm gonna test and see if we do have a gel set or if the jam is going to set up nicely for us. So what the spoon does is it rapidly cools down our jam, and so we'll know what it's going to act like at room temperature. All right, so I'm gonna bring you down on the counter so you can see what's going on. I've got the spoon up and down and it's not running off like a liquid would, and so this is still technically a liquid. It's just a lot thicker, so this is good. This is what we want. If I run my finger through it, we've got something that resembles a jam. That was for my timer. The timer is up. It's been 40 minutes, and when I run my finger through it, it's really good. You can see a trail where my finger went through the jam there. So this is done. We do have gel set. Even though the jam is technically done, I do want to add these spices to it. I think this is going to help round out the flavor. So we need 2 star anise. It might be star anise. I am not sure about that pronunciation. And then it calls for freshly grated ginger, which I do not have. I'd have a little bit of this ginger powder that I'm just going to sprinkle in and just guess at what's going to be a good amount. A couple, maybe a few pinches. I did turn off the heat now that we're at a gel set, and I'm going to leave the star anise in here for about 10 minutes just so it can heat up and the flavor can marry into our jam, and then we need to let this cool down. I realized upon reviewing the recipe a little bit too that it does call for a pinch of salt, and that might seem weird to add into a jam recipe. Salt really is just a flavor enhancer, and so adding salt into sweet recipes often will bring out some really nice flavors that can kind of get missed when the salt isn't there. It just helps bring things together. It's really good on fudge and things. You can see we do have a little bit of foam around the outside edge, and this wouldn't be there if I had the butter to add, but I didn't, and that's okay. All right, it's actually been over 10 minutes, so I'm gonna remove my spices. And then I'm going to be freezing these in some plastic containers, some plastic freezer containers. I do not like to add hot liquids into plastic. So what I'm going to do is actually set this off to the side and allow it to cool completely before I pack it up. But it's very good, very hot. I will say, I think the preservation process has kind of diluted the flavor of the ground cherries. Ground cherries are very zippy and explosive in flavor. They're very, very good. And I feel like I more taste sugar than anything else with this. It's not bad. It's a nice way to preserve them. It's just something I'm noticing is it's not as vibrant as the fresh fruit is. The recipe maker does say that it's very good with fresh goat cheese, and I have a lot of that, so we'll try it with that too. While we wait for that to cool down, we can race this thunderstorm to close up the doors to the greenhouse. And I can quickly show you what the ground cherries look like. So, they get their name for this reason. When they are ready, they ripen and the husk turns brown like this, and they fall to the ground. This is what they look like inside the husk, just like they looked like in that quart jar. There's a delicious, like, almost pineapple-y type flavor to them that sadly is not coming through on the jam. What it looks like after it has cooled down. You can see all the seeds in there and all the little fruit pieces. So we've clearly gotten a gel. So that worked out well. I'm going to try it with a little bit of sourdough bread with some homemade goat's milk chev. Sometimes jams and jellies can come out a little bit too sticky where it's almost, I don't know, like silly putty. We're not there, but I've done that before. This is one of the ways that the recipe maker says that it's good to try. It's a little bit reminiscent of like an apricot jam. So as it's cooled down a little bit, more of the ground cherry flavor is coming through. It's very good. It wouldn't hurt for this to have like a little bit of vanilla in it. I can see that being very good. This would be very good on some vanilla ice cream. And the recipe maker also said it was good to have on crackers with some sharp cheddar. I don't have crackers or sharp cheddar, but I have this Colby that I've made. It's crazy how two completely different flavors can come together and be really awesome. Yeah, I'm double dipping for that one. That was actually really good. Cheers. So we are going to be freezing this jam today as opposed to canning. This isn't an approved canning recipe, even though the recipe link that I have linked gives canning directions. I would not advise that you do that. But freezer jam is a thing for good reason. There's plenty of really great freezer jam recipes. I think I need a bigger spatula. And in theory, I think we should get about 2 pints worth of jam. So this is an 8-ounce container. We should get about 4 of those. I don't know if and we might get 3. And of course I'm making a mess, but as I always say it with me, make a mess or it doesn't count. Alrighty, so it looks like things cooked down enough to where we only got 2 of these 8-ounce containers full of jam, which I am very satisfied with. It was a very simple process and a pretty good product. So I think I'm actually gonna leave one of these out for the fridge and I'll mark the other one for the freezer. Ground. There's never a decent Sharpie anywhere, right? So we actually had a heat advisory today. I'm filming this on July 4th. And so the heat index today was up to 110. And then this lovely storm blew through and it's cooled down enough to where the automatic vents on the greenhouse automatically closed. I never see this in July. Closed up, even with the door shut. I have plenty more ground cherries to harvest, so if you have any methods or recipes for preserving ground cherries, I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for joining me on this stormy afternoon. I'll see you guys again soon. So we are going to be